Hello, hello. I am Karita Griffith Walker here with another kind of high level vision session for us dance educators around the world. Um, I've been working this series off of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Living, a very classic book by Stephen Covey. So we are on the second habit, which is begin with the end in mind. Yes, begin with the end in mind. Yes, so in the book and in other places, you hear this idea that creation happens twice. First, it happens mentally, creation happens in the mind, and then second, it happens in the physical reality, right? So that's kind of the high level idea. And if we don't do a strong version of mental creation of what it is that we go for, sometimes we can be a little bit to the four winds in a way that can throw us off of where we wanted to go, right? So now for us as dance educators, I like to think about it as us being like the captains of a ship. Like we set the course, right? We don't just like get in a boat and like let's just ride and see where it goes, right? We set a course and we navigate the ship. We don't have control over the winds. We don't have control over all those things, but we find ways to steer and navigate those things effectively, right? Because there's all kinds of things that can affect what goes on in a dance class, but at the end of the day, we're driving it. Yes, we command the space. That's who we are as educators in the room. And I want to contrast that with the idea of us as artists and dancers ourselves, in that many times as dancers and artists, we want to be in a go with the flow kind of thing. And like, what do I feel like doing today? What do I feel like, what do I feel like working on? But as educators, it's a bit of a different hat, right? We know that being a dancer is one thing, being an educator, a dance educator is something else. So in our role as educator, we want to be thinking about what is it that we're seeking to cultivate in our students. What do we want to cultivate in them as individuals? What kind of a learning environment are we creating and cultivating? What kind of community are we cultivating in our classes? There's all these different benefits of dance class, of any style, that we can be cultivating if we are proactive in that vision. And certainly, so I just want to make sure that when we're creating this vision, it's not just about us as artists, as dancers ourselves, but it's about who we are as dance educators and wearing that hat and making that very clear distinction. And I've talked with and been working with so many dance educators inside both my TAP teacher training program and the program I have about race and dance history, that where dance educators are continuing to think broadly and more broadly about who our students are and seeing the realities of things, whether or not we're trying to cultivate it, but whether or not we're trying to cultivate it, we're cultivating patrons of the arts. We have students that some students, it's like, do you have a group of students that want to see So You Think You Can Dance shows or dance moms performances? Do you have students that want to see Camille Brown dance company? Do you have people, are you cultivating an audience of, ballet patrons, and why? What's refined, what's beautiful? Like they're getting aesthetic learning from us, directly or indirectly, and that affects how they show up in the world as patrons of the arts. Even right now, as a 9-year-old who wants to go see a show, right? So we're cultivating that. Where of course we know this, we're cultivating ambassadors of our programs. They represent our training. We didn't know it, but we were apparently cultivating TikTok users, and there are students out there that are engaging in TikTok, and getting into some hairy kind of like cultural issues, racial issues. I saw an article over the past summer in Wired magazine called like TikTok in the age of like digital blackface, because there's this kind of modern day minstrelsy that's happening on the app, and there are students and dancers, regardless of whether or not they're students at this point, that don't even know or that aren't really conscious of why that's an important issue, because in their dance environments they haven't learned about minstrelsy. You're learning hip hop, you're learning tap dance, you're learning these forms. It's valuable to learn about minstrelsy. And I definitely have thought back to some students and going, oh gosh, I don't think I covered that. I talked about this dancer, this dancer, this dancer, but I don't think I talked about that concept. As I got on in my teaching, I was more proactive in teaching that concept in my tap dance classes, but did not do that early on. And I'm like, oh, like I left that out. And so kind of leaving your students out there, and they're engaging and they're doing it, they're engaging in it, but maybe without the tools they need to really navigate the environment with critical thinking, right? It's out there, it's happening. We are, cultivating some performers. We never know which students are going to become performers. I was one of the last people that my teacher thought would become a professional dancer. But we're cultivating future performers, whether it's local musical theater or, school plays, or, getting onto world stages. We're cultivating performers. And even more than that, I think more of us are creating dance teachers. How many students go on to at least teach in college, as like the part-time job, while they're going to school? And did we really think about that part of their education as they were training? Did we really cultivate them into becoming teachers, or are they really good at dance and so now they're going to go teach? Right? Did we give them enough of a holistic picture so that they could, whether it's technique or history or whatever, to help them to really turn around and become effective and well-informed, critical thinking dance educators, right? This is, who they are. Our students are members of a global dance community more and more, right? In this age of, internet, social media, and all the things, we're more connected now than ever before, which is amazing. And so in one way or another, so many of us are contributing to this local dance community as artists ourselves, as choreographers, performers, teachers, all these patrons, all these different hats that our students wear. So for me personally, like, I've definitely expanded my thinking about many of those things, but something that's been with me for a long time, and it's informed the way that I have certainly set up my tab teacher training program, is about facilitating independence. That's been a big thing in my vision of who I want my students to be. My father used to say something like, I know it involved curse words, I'm going to leave those out, but it was something like, I'm not in the business of raising dependents. I am not in the business of raising dependents. So I've carried that certainly into my parenting, but also into my work with my students, that I don't want to be in a position where, I hear so many tap teachers say this, dance teachers of different styles, they can't do it without me, right? When I was a brand new dance teacher, that happened a fair amount. Like, I didn't realize how much I was demonstrating and all of that. And then I turn around and they're supposed to get on stage by themselves and they're struggling because I didn't facilitate their independence, right? So the reality of the situation is that our vision needs to influence our pedagogy as educators. Yes, our vision needs to influence our pedagogy. Yeah, so if I'm in the room with my dance students, I have to think about what's going to make them more independent in this moment. Just as an example, one of my least favorite questions for my dance students, back me up if you've heard this one. What foot did that start on? Right? You're doing an exercise, you're doing a piece of choreography. What foot did that start on? I don't love that question. And I think to myself, after a while, I started to think to myself, how can I answer that question in a way that will help my students to become more independent? So I'm not just going to like do the quick answer so I can go on. I'm going to use it in my head as a teachable moment to work towards my vision, right? So in that way, in that moment, my vision influences the pedagogy. So unless they are 6 and under, I'm not answering that question directly. What I will say is this. Either A, in some situations, it doesn't matter. So you're like, pick a foot and go, right? In certain styles, it really doesn't matter. But if it does matter in a certain situation, I will say this. I'm going to do the step one more time. And when everybody, challenge, game on. When you know what foot it is, I want you to like raise your hand when you know what foot it is. Right? Or like, I'm going to do it one more time and I'll give you a chance to get to answer that question because I know you know what it is. If I'm talking to adults, I'll do it a little bit different. If I'm dealing with younger kids, I'll kind of game it up a little bit. So I'll be like, okay, game on, raise your hand when you know what the foot is that it starts on. And then I'll do it. And they all know how to peep their eyes on it. They know their right from their left. And they go, left. I go, that is how I want to answer that question so that it facilitates their independence. And over time, I got that question less and less. The more I work with those students, the less I got those questions, right? I don't like that question. How do I facilitate their independence? This is too easy of a question. And sometimes I'll tell them, like, I want you guys to get to the place of asking really like sophisticated questions. So if you get in a room with like an amazing masterclass with like Diane Walker or somebody like that, and you had the chance to ask a question, I would just be so sad if the question you had was, what foot did that start on? Right? I want you to ask something where she can teach you about life, like teach you, something deeper about tap dance, some insight that she has that I can't give you, right? I want you to get that from her. If you have the chance to ask a question, let's not keep it at like, what foot did it start on? Like, come on, guys, right? So like mess around with it that way, but I'm facilitating their independence in that process. And so my choice of how to answer the question is my pedagogy adjustment that I made so that I could facilitate, work towards my vision of raising independent dancers, training independent dancers who learn faster. Right? So that's one of the things. Certainly something that I've talked about in my Roots Rhythm Race and Dance program, where I'm working with dance educators of all styles beyond tap dance, is about facilitating critical thinking in students, facilitating discussion, cultivating healthy discussion, right? Because we don't want things to veer off and things to get weird, things to get uncomfortable, that kind of thing. So think about how can we facilitate a healthy discussion? How can we facilitate critical thinking? So they're not just taking on whatever we say, right? But that they're developing some critical thinking about that. And one of the ways that I realized how not to do it, I'll tell you one thing I did that was like did not work, was here's the worst question to ask like a group of 12-year-olds. Do you have any questions? Have any thoughts? Crickets, right? Crickets, crickets, crickets. When I asked questions, I did this presentation with some students about the concept of cultural appropriation. And I had a whole story together, had a whole thing that would really make it like a very age appropriate, introductory kind of conversation about it. And so I go through some questions for comprehension. They understand the concept, they understand where it comes from. They're like with all of the like who, what, where, when, why. They're with that. But I want them to like talk about it a little bit. Any more thoughts? Do you have any questions? Excruciating crickets. Right? So I had to start giving some more thought to questions that would get them to talk, right? And questions that would be positive, right? Like uplifting, encouraging, kind of, positive, pointed kind of questions, right? So that's something that I've still continued to work on. And that's like an area that I've definitely seen that I needed some work in what I was introducing with my students. If you are And then later on, you can get to this point where you have older students who are maybe high school and university level. I had a professor who was in my Roots Rhythm Race and Dance program who said that, as she was working through her conversations with her students, that they all of a sudden are bringing more to the table and sharing that they're having different thoughts about what shows they want to see, what shows they might want to be in, what kind of companies they would want to be in, and why. Right? They're having more critical thought themselves, without her prompting, that really reflect a deeper kind of consideration that they're giving to who they want to be as dancers, right? She's like thrilled at their level of thinking about that. And so that's something that we can be fostering in our students if we are setting that out in our vision and allowing our pedagogy to support that vision. Do you have a culture in your dance program that's petty or competitive, right? If you have that situation and you want to cultivate an encouraging and uplifting dance environment, how do you envision your pedagogy, your approaches to set that up, right? How do you incentivize that encouragement, that upliftment? How do you facilitate that? Right? I remember working with some young students and I had to figure out, because they were kind of brother sistery, this group of students, they danced together all the time. They were about 9 years old and they could get really like brother sistery in class, and like this one's fighting with this one. And I was like, oh God. So as part of what I do with my students is that I'll have, this group watch this group and this group watch this group, so that they're cultivating their understanding of what standards I've set, so that they can understand them, better when they're the person that's doing the evaluation, when they're assessing, when they're critiquing. But I always ask them something in the positive. So I'll say, I want you to watch stage left, I want you to watch stage right, and I want you to tell me who's nailing it, who's doing it really well, and why. I don't ask them to look for corrections, Because if we went into corrections, then they're going to get personal. They're going to like go into brother sister mode, like, and it's going to go into some of that, that vibe that they had in the class that I'm like, that's not where I want to go. I want, them to be teamwork, 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 uplifting each other, lift each other up, and giving each other that peer encouragement of being noticed for doing something really well, even if it's a very small thing, right? So in that way, with my pedagogy, I set them up to do peer observation, one. Two, I set them up with a question that would be an uplifting and encouraging question. Who is really doing well with that and why? Who's made the most improvement? What have you noticed, over the past month? Who's made the most improvement with that particular exercise or whatever? And then they point that out. And then you see that, that other students stand a little taller because they've been acknowledged by their peers. And so in that way, I've created a different environment. So again, we're thinking about this principle of beginning with the end in mind. Mental creation first, and then we create that in our physical reality. But as dance educators, I just want to keep putting this in front of you, that some of us have pedagogy that is working in opposition to what we say we want. Okay, so we want to be rethinking and reevaluating always, right? We're always like trying to find ways to make it better and bring more and more out of our students, create a better experience for our students. We're never settling. We're dancers, right? We never settle, right? So we're always trying to find that way to make it better. But I encourage you to evaluate your pedagogy to see, one, make sure that you have a vision that you feel really good about. Is your vision holistic? Is it expansive? Is it, inclusive? Those kinds of things. And then do you have a pedagogy that is supporting that? Or do you have some things in your habits, in your approaches, in your teaching style that's working against that? For example, if you really want your students to learn faster, if you want your students to be more independent dancers in terms of technique and artistry, if you're demonstrating for them all the time, that pedagogy is working against that vision, right? So you cannot continue to demonstrate for them all the time, or 70%, even 50% of the time is too much. That in my experience, to where they can then start to function for themselves. As long as you continue to do for them, it's like having those two crutches there that they will continue to lean on as long as they're there, right? So we need to have other teaching skills in place and parameters in place that will give our students the tools to function independently. So I don't mean throw them out, sink or swim. Here's this, really hard thing to do, and and I did it 2 times, figure it out. No, I don't mean that, right? We're not trying to set our students up to fail, right? But there are ways to help your average students with their technique, with their sense of being brave and improvising in a different, whatever style. There are ways to bring these things out gradually in our students, using our pedagogy, using our teaching approaches. We can do that. We have such an amazing power in our spaces, right? And sometimes we forget that, right? That there's so much that we can do as the person who's in the room responsible to set that course and navigate the ship and navigate our students, concerns, fears, talents, skills, natural abilities, things that don't come easily to our students. We have abilities to navigate all of that with our pedagogy and with our vision, right? So that is my thought for today about habits of being a very effective dance educator at that very kind of high level 10,000 foot view. And so I hope that this is useful for you. And what I would love for you to do is share that. Like, what's your vision? Share it, jump into wherever you're seeing this in the comments, like, cultivating. What do you envision in your students a year from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now? Even if you're teaching an open class and you have, with adults and you have the same regulars for 10 years. My husband teaches open classes, weekly open classes, open enrollment, come when you want to, don't come when you don't want to. And he's had some of the same students for 15 years, right? So it's like, these people keep coming back. What are you offering? So he'll look and say, you know what, they're getting this, but they're not getting this. So even in those environments where it's a lot more fluid, you can be cultivating a vision of the kind of community that you're creating, the culture that you're creating, the learning environment that you're creating, and what you're getting out of your students, and then adjusting your pedagogy, and then taking that good critical look at your pedagogy and evaluating whether or not your pedagogy is supporting you achieving that vision, or sometimes is it a hindrance or somewhere in the middle of that, right? I know it can get gray as well. So you want to sometimes evaluate that in the moment, right? Evaluate it in the moment when you're teaching, because that's when the heat is on, right? That's when the heat is on. So evaluate it then, and then let me know how it goes, right? Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you another time with another one of the habits for highly effective people/dance educators. All right, take care.